Cool. One thing before we start, just if you haven't been added to the Slack, just shoot me a text or an email so that we can add you. Because it might be a good resource and an easy way to communicate instead of me sending you like 15 emails every week. Um, but if no one else has any other questions, we're gonna get started today. Shreya, do you wanna?
Yeah, so I'm gonna present this first part. So if you guys can pin the screen that has my paper, if you can find that and pin that, that would be great.
Oh,
Can
hold up.
everyone see it? It's the one where my hand is waving over it.
I'm
Okay.
sharing my screen then so we can pin it.
Are you
Has
still
anyone
sharing?
found Shreya's paper?
Okay. Are you gonna share your screen again?
I can't share it and then also pin your paper. You can only
Oh,
do.
gotcha. Gotcha. That's okay. I'm just gonna pull it up then for myself. Awesome. So first, just in terms of big picture things, you want to be able to you want to make sure that you're leaving enough space as you're diagramming. So when you start writing a rule, and if the first rule is like k must come before l, if you write it near the edge of your page and then you find out that l needs to have something else after it, you're just going to have to rewrite everything, right? And so as you're diagramming, if you can, I would say like diagram your rules more towards the middle, and then also leave enough space if you're someone who wants to use like the chart method where like you're stacking all of your combinations one on top of another. I like leaving space at both sides. And the reason why is because sometimes I want to write a local rule next to the chart. And other times, if a question's asking like what must be true if J is in 4 or something, I'll like write arrows next to all of the rows where J is in 4 so that I know which rows I'm looking at. Um, does that make sense? Okay. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is inferences versus brute force. Last week, we kind of covered how you don't have to sit there and make all of the inferences at the beginning, right? It's not useful to you to sit there and just stare at things if you're not instinctively seeing them. And you build that like instinct and intuition over time. The more you do games, the more you'll realize, oh, like these kinds of rules can be combined in this kind of way. And so until you build that yourself, I think it's better just to like jump into the game. And it's usually faster and more efficient that way. But in the long run, the kinds of inferences that you can make before you start um, doing a game, like one of them would be to combine rules. So if you have a rule that, K must come before L and L must come before J, you can combine those, right? You can just write K must come before L, which must come before J. But you can combine all kinds of rules. Let's say like S and K can't go together. They have to go on different groups or whatever. And then let's say you find out that M can't go with S and also can't go with K. That means you can combine that rule and say that S, K, and M all have to be in different groups entirely. Does that make sense? And so the easiest way to combine rules is as you're about to write a rule down, just check really quickly, do I already have another rule with that same letter? Is there some way that I can combine that reasonably? I would say like 75% of the time you can combine a rule when two rules have the same letter. Occasionally you can't, and that's totally fine. But if you can combine it, you're making it easier for yourself if you do. Another thing I recommend is I'll have like my chart or like diagram kind of written out before start writing down some of my rules. So if I know, like let's say I have 4 spaces here, if I know that J can't go in 4, then I can just write that here. But if I didn't have this, then I probably would have to write something like, you know, J can't go in the 4th space or something. But then that's not as intuitive. Like when I'm just solving the game, like this is much more helpful to have, right? So instead of like rewriting rules, sometimes it's easier to write whatever your general diagram is going to be first so that you can write your rules into the diagram. Does that make sense? Okay. And then another thing you can keep track of is negative deductions. And what that really just means is if you find out, for example, that like J can't go into 4, and then in another rule you find out that like J has to come after like S and R, right? Now all of a sudden there's only one place that J can go. J can only go in the third spot, right? So negative deductions is just finding out what can be based off of like what can't be, and vice versa. Like if a rule tells you that certain things can't happen, you kind of also want to keep in mind like what can happen. And like I said, like all of these things you will find happening to you more and more naturally the more that you do games. It's not something that's, everyone can just do at the beginning. This is just something that you can notice, and if you can notice, like, you can keep track of it. If you don't notice, that's totally fine too. Another thing is keeping track of unassigned variables. So we talked about that last week as well, right? Floaters. If you can keep track of the floaters, that's really, really helpful because then you know what the least restricted thing is. Similarly, you can also keep track of what's most restricted. If something's really, really restricted and can only go in 1 or 2 spaces, or let's say a space itself is restricted. Let's say only like 2 letters can go in this column. You want to keep track of that because that probably means that that space is really easy to fill. And you might even see patterns arising every time you fill that space, right? Like maybe, this space can only be filled by R or T, but every time R goes here, like J goes here. Every time T goes here, J goes somewhere else, if that makes sense. So keeping track of what's restricted versus unrestricted can also help. And then lastly, remember the numbers. And what I mean by that is sometimes before they list the rules in like the earlier part of the game, they'll tell you about like the minimum or maximum number of things that can go in each group and stuff like that. And you want to keep track of that as a rule because it is a rule, right? Even if it's not listed as a rule, it is a rule. And sometimes they'll tell you the number of times that a variable can appear. Can each variable only appear once? Can it appear more than once? Can it appear any number of times? Like all of those things can happen. And so you want to pay attention for those things and write them in as rules, even if they're not listed as your rules and they're just given to you before. And the last thing I wanted to go over is, give me 1 second, sorry. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to go over is conditional rules for grouping. So last time I mentioned this, right? How you can write the double arrow. This just represents if A, then B, if B, then A. And what this means for grouping games and for in and out games, like if every time you have A, you have B, and if every time you have B, you have A, all that really means is A and B are always showing up together, right? So it's much simpler to think of that as this than to think of it as this or this.
I got a question right quick. When you say if A then B then B then A, what is the one where you say that you don't need like one doesn't need the other? Does that make sense? What I'm asking you.
Do you mean like if not A, then B?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if this happens, then it's this. If the opposite happens, right? Like, or if you have one where one of the letters, if it's something like this, um,
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That one.
if something like this is happening, right? What that means
Hmm.
is that A and B are never going together.
Okay.
You can write that like this. You can write A and B and then cross them out to show that they're not going together. But however you decide to write it, all of these things mean the same thing. But for this to happen, this is not the contrapositive of this, right? Do you guys see that? This is just when you have two rules where they're telling you like, okay, if A, then B, but also if B, then A. That
Hmm.
happens occasionally in grouping and in and out games. It's much easier to think of these kinds of rules like this or this than to think of them as a bunch of conditional statements, right? Because from
Okay.
this, you can actually get 4 conditional statements. You can get this and also their contrapositives, right? So if you're someone that feels the need to like write out, okay, these are the 2 rules that they gave me. I also want to write out their contrapositives. All of a sudden you have 4 rules that you're trying to keep track of, right? but you don't, what all four of those rules really represent is just this.
Okay.
So this is the same as this, and this is the same as if B had been crossed out instead of A.
Okay.
So basically, if one side is crossed out and the other isn't, then that just means that those letters are going to be separate each time. And then if both sides are crossed out or if neither side is crossed out, that just means they're always going to be together. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about
Yeah.
that? Okay, sounds good. And that's everything I had for like bigger picture things to think about when doing games.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Can you all hear me? Awesome. Okay, so today we're going to talk about grouping games, which are a different type of game, and they're the kind of games that are second most common. So sequencing are the most common types of games, and then my Among Us just started. Hold on one. I hate technology. Okay, sorry. So grouping games are the second most common type of games. And the characteristics of them is this time you don't have to worry about the ordering function. So how in sequencing games, we have to worry about which one comes first, which comes second, which one comes fifth, or whatever. In grouping games, it's more about, okay, well, we have groups 1, 2, and 3. Who goes or what goes in each category? Does that make sense? So the way you spot a grouping game is they'll give you one set of variables. So they'll say something like, well, there's 6 people A, B, C, D, E, F. And then they'll tell you that they have to be split up into 2 categories. So these 6 people or musicians or whatever, they have to perform on either stage A or stage B, and they can only each perform on one stage. And they'll tell you to figure out which stage they're each performing on. And you have to group them into certain categories. Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So this setup over here is kind of how I would do it, depending on how the answers are presented to me in the first question that tells me to figure out what's a valid combination. Um, so sometimes I'll set it up like 1, 2, 3, and then I will leave the amount of spots. So if there's 6 people and I have to evenly split them between 3 groups, I'd write 2 lines for each of them. That's the way you could set it up. I like to do a more vertical setup for these games. So I would write groups 1, 2, 3, and then I'd write 2 spots. Just because organizationally, for me, this works better. Both of these setups would lead you to the right answer. There's no one right setup. And Sharia likely has a different way to set it up too.
I set it up exactly the first way that you set it up, but instead of like, I'll just keep stacking combinations.
Right. Because I go this way. So like I'd be like start with A, start with B, and brute force across the way. So I think you set it up like intuitively. And then like, yeah, you're more intuitive than I am, but I'm more of a brute force person. So the vertical setup works better for me, but the horizontal chart setup works better for Shreya. And again, there's no one right way to do it. Both of them will lead you to the right answer if you do it correctly. Does that make sense to everyone so far? The one other thing to notice is sometimes grouping games won't tell you exactly how many people or variables go into each category. So it'll tell you that there's 8 different people and 3 different groups, and you are not sure how many go in each group. They might tell you that some of them have 2, some of them have 3, some of them have 5. I don't know because the game doesn't tell me. So if they tell you how many they have, then sure, set up the lines, but if you're not quite certain, you don't have to have these lines. If the game doesn't tell me I'm evenly splitting the people or the variables between all 3 groups, then I don't need the lines, I just need the spaces to know how many different categories there are. Does that make sense to everyone? I see that there's a question in the chat. Never mind, it's Nicole being helpful. And if you haven't met Nicole, Nicole's a person who runs really great. and we work with her. So Nicole, if you want to say hi to people.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm just dropping in, and if you see my comments, they're just additional things. You're in such good hands with the Karshna and Sriya and Janati. But I think one thing that I wish I knew really early on was grouping games means 3 or more groups. There's another game that we'll get to later that's called In and Out that is 2 groups. And the sooner that you can just think of like, oh, there's 3 groups or more, that's grouping. I think it's just helpful to know.
Yeah.
For some, it's common sense. For me, it was not when I was learning.
I would say the one thing I would add on to that though is sometimes there are grouping games with just 2 categories.
We're gonna do one today.
Okay, they're just really they're not as common. They're really not as common. The main difference between a grouping game and an in and out game, in an in and out game, you can tell that if something doesn't go in one column, it must go in the other column. In grouping games where there's just 2 columns, maybe it doesn't go in one group, but maybe that means it also doesn't have to go in the other group.
And I would consider the third group the out group. So it'd be 3 groups.
Gotcha. So what you're saying that you would consider, say that one more time, sorry.
Yeah, so if it can be in group 1, which is say like group 1 is tree 1, group 2 is tree 2, group 3 is no tree. It's out.
Gotcha.
So 3 groups.
Yeah. Gotcha. I guess the thing with that is like sometimes you don't know, there's no like number for like how many things have to be out or in.
Correct.
And then that could make it like harder, I guess. But yeah, almost always though, like grouping games will have 3 or more groups. That is true.
Does anyone have any questions so far before we work on some examples? I'm going to assume no. Did you guys get my email telling you which games we're going to be doing? Because I know some of you wanted to print out the games before we got to them so that you had it to reference.
Yes, we got them.
Okay, great. All right, so the first one we're going to work on is a game from PT29. And this is an easier one, so we'll start with this. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. So it says on a Tuesday, an accountant has exactly 7 bills numbered 1 through 7. And the first thing I do is write it down. So we have 7 bills and they're numbered 1 through 7. And he has to pay them by Thursday of the week. The accountant will pay each bill only once according to the following rules. Either 3 or 4 of the 7 bills must be paid on Wednesday and the rest on Thursday. So all this means is that we're going to have 2 scenarios. One where there's 3 on Wednesday and 4 on Thursday. Or we're going to have 4 on Wednesday and 3 on Thursday. Does that make sense to everyone how I got to that from that rule? Or does anyone have any questions about that?
Could you do that one more time?
Yeah, so they're telling us that either 3 or 4 of the 7 bills must be paid on Wednesday. So if we have 3 paid on Wednesday, how many must be paid on Thursday?
4.
4.
Right. So, but then they said you could also potentially have 4 bills paid on Wednesday. So if you pay 4 on Wednesday, how many must be paid on Thursday?
3.
3. So those are your 2 scenarios where you either have 3 on Wednesday and 4 on Thursday, or you have 4 on Wednesday and 3 on Thursday. Does that make sense to everyone? So you can never have a setup where it's like 1 on Wednesday and 6 on Thursday, or 5 on Wednesday and 2 on Thursday. It always has to be 3 and 4, and it could alternate. We're not quite sure which one has 3 and which one has 4. Does that make sense? Is there a question in the chat? Let me check real quick.
That was just me. So I'm the one that picked the games for this week, and I accidentally picked an in and out game instead of a grouping game.
Honestly, it kind of works as a grouping game, so it's perfectly fine.
Okay, yeah,
It does work as a grouping game, so it's perfectly fine.
Yeah. My bad.
No, it's totally fine, and it's pretty easy too, I think, so we're okay. I did do it early. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess it's a weird grouping game. But let's keep moving. The second rule says bill 1 cannot be paid on the same day as bill 5. So that means if bill 1 is paid on Wednesday, then bill 5 has to be paid on Thursday. They can never be together. So 1 and 5 can never happen. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm going to assume yes.
Hey, Karshna, so when you put that rule out, you're not deliberately putting it under scenario 1 because it doesn't just apply to scenario 1, right? I just answered my own question. Sorry. Yeah, no. Okay. Done.
Oh, I'm not
Moving
putting
on.
it under scenario 1. Like, it's just another bullet
Yeah,
point here.
just the rule for the problem. Yeah, yeah.
Anyone have any other questions? Okay. Our third rule says that bill 2 must be paid on Thursday. So we know that 2 is always going to be paid on a Thursday. And then our fourth rule says bill 4 must be paid on the same day as bill 7. So no matter what day it's on, 4 and 7 must be together. Make sense so far? Okay. And our last rule, if bill 6 is paid on a Wednesday, so if 6 is on a Wednesday, then 7 must be on a Thursday. And if that's the case, what else do we know is also on Thursday?
So does that mean if bill 6 is on Thursday, then bill 7 is on Wednesday?
Hold on, let's start over here. And just
So
say
bill 2 and 7 has to be on Thursday.
what else? Because if we know that bill 4 and 7 are always together, and we know that 7 is going to be on Thursday if 6 is on Wednesday, what else is going to be with 7?
Oh,
4.
4.
4. So we know that 4 is also going to be on Thursday, and 2. 2 is always going to be in Thursday. Does that make sense to everyone?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And Kira, you were kind of getting ahead there, but let's talk about what happens when 7 is not on Thursday. So 7 is on Wednesday, and 6 is going to be on Thursday. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about how I got to that contrapositive?
Could you explain that a little bit more for me?
Yeah. So if we have the contrapositive being 7 is not on Thursday. So if it's not on Thursday, what day is it going to be?
On Wednesday.
Wednesday. So if 7 is not on Thursday, then 6 is not on Wednesday. And if 6 is not on Wednesday, what day is that going to be?
If 6 is not
Thursday.
Thursday.
Thursday. So that means if 7 is on Wednesday, then 6 is going to be on Thursday. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yes.
I'm sorry. Does it also mean that like when you switch the 7th being on Thursday, so then that, or now it's on Wednesday, so that means 4 needs to also be on Wednesday.
Yes.
That they're
4 is
paid on the same
always-
day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone have any questions? That's a great question.
Would you typically do the contrapositive for something like that? Oh, yeah, you would, because it's, yeah. Okay.
I like writing the contrapositives out just because I don't get confused that way.
Mhm. And it's stated as a conditional statement, so why wouldn't you, is the way I see it now.
Anytime I get a contrapositive, like anytime I get a conditional, I just write out the contrapositive because I know I can keep myself on track with that and I don't get myself confused. It takes me an extra 10 seconds and now I know exactly what can and can't happen and I won't confuse myself later.
Copy.
You have to if you're like really, really good at games, but I just feel comfortable doing that just so I know that I'm not gonna get myself tricked by easy answers that are wrong, but I just confused myself by not writing out things that I should have written out.
I feel you.
Anyone else have any other questions? Okay, so the way that I set it up is I just have a little chart where I'd have Wednesday and then I'd have Thursday, and then I just start putting things underneath. Does that make sense? Okay, let's start with the first question then. If exactly 4 bills are paid on Wednesday, then those 4 bills could be, okay, So there's two ways you can do this. Again, you can brute force every single answer, but I think for a game this simple, it actually is easier to go rule by rule rather than answer choice by answer choice. So I'm gonna check to make sure that there's no answers, that there are answers with where bill 1 and bill 5 are together, and I'm gonna cross them out because that's our rule that 1 and 5 can never be together. So if I look at that, I say B has 1 and 5 together, so I know that can't be right. Does that make sense? Okay. The next rule says that bill 2 must be paid on Thursday, and we're looking for the 4 bills that are paid on Wednesday. So 2 can never be one of the answer choices, right? So
The
I'm
C is out.
the C is out. Then I'm gonna look for anything that says 4 or 7, but they don't have both of them. So 4 is alone or 7 is alone, I can cross that out too because I know 4 and 7 always have to be together. So that takes out A. And the last rule says if bill 6 is paid on Wednesday, bill 7 and bill 4 must be paid on Thursday. So I'm going to look for an answer choice that has 6 here and also 4 or 7 because I know they can't be together on Wednesday. And that's E. So I can cross that out because if 6 is on Wednesday, then I know that 4 and 7 have to be on Thursday, which leaves me with D as the right answer. Does that make sense to everyone, or does anyone have any questions how I got to that? Okay. I'm going to move on to the next question then. 2, which one of the following is a complete and accurate list of the bills, any one of which could be among the bills paid on Wednesday? Okay, here's a really smart thing to do. In our question above, we said if exactly 4 bills are paid on Wednesday, then those 4 bills could be. And then we said 3, 4, 5, and 7 could be the bills paid on Wednesday. They have to be my answer choice. We're looking for the complete and accurate list of anything that could be paid on Wednesday. So 3, 4, 5, and 7 have to be part of my answer choice because I know they could be paid on a Wednesday. Does that make sense to everyone so far? Or does anyone have any questions?
I had a quick question. After number 1 is answered, do we plug 3, 4, 5, and 7 in the chart that you made, like for reference, or?
What I normally would do is I would write 1 and then I'd write the correct answer. And I'd literally write that down and I'd say if 3, 4, 5, and 7 are here, I know 1, 2, and 6 are here. So I have a full diagram and I'm not going to touch my main diagram. So the only thing I'd have in my main diagram here is a 2 because that's the only thing I know for certain. And I never touch that again unless I make an inference. But now I have number 1 and I have the right answer down so I can reference it back if I need it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Does everyone understand why I'd look for 3, 4, 5, and 7 as part of my answer choice in number 2? Okay. So if I'm looking for the complete and accurate list, 3, 4, 5, and 7 definitely need to be a part of it. So I'm going to cross out everything that doesn't have those 4 numbers. So A only has 3 and 5, so I can cross that out. B only has 3, 4, and 7, so I can cross that out. C has 3, 4, 5, and 7. That looks good so far. D and E, I would cross out immediately because of the number 2. I know that 2 always has to be on Thursday, so can it possibly be on a Wednesday?
No.
No. So you don't even have to consider those as your right answer. And that leaves me with C as my right answer. Does that make sense to everyone?
I have another question. I'm sorry.
No, don't be.
So for 1 cannot be paid as the same day as bill 5.
Yeah.
So how is C right, or how do we take out the, you know what I mean?
So they're not asking for what is all going to be on Wednesday at the same time. They're just asking which.
Oh, in general, got it. Okay.
So is it possible that 1 is paid on a Wednesday and 5 is paid on a Thursday? Yes.
Right. Got it.
Make sense?
Yes.
Anyone else have any other questions about number 2?
That's a good question. I didn't catch that at first. That would have driven me crazy.
Yeah, there are no bad questions. ask all your questions. If no one else has any other questions right now, I'm going to move on to 3. And again, stop me if you need anything. 3 says if bill 2 and bill 6 are paid on different days from each other, then which one of the following must be true? The first thing I do is draw my diagram and see if I can fill out anything else on my diagram. So we know that 2 has to be on a Thursday, right? So that means that bill 6 must be on a Wednesday because this question is introducing the condition that they're paid on different days. So for this specific question, I'm going to put 6 on Wednesday and leave 2 in Thursday. If 6 is in Wednesday, where does that put 4 and 7?
Thursday.
Thursday.
What do we know about 1 and 5?
They can't be together on the same day.
Right. So do we know which one is going to go on Wednesday and which one is going to go on Thursday? No.
No.
The only thing I can write is 1/5, 1/5 for each of them because we don't know where they're going to go. And now it's a question of where 3 is going to go. What do you guys think? Where do you think 3 is going to go?
Wednesday?
Yes. Why?
Is it because you have to have 3 in one and 4 in the other?
Yeah. So if you
Yep.
have, you know that Thursday has to have at least one, it has to have another one. It has to have either 1 or 5. That means the 4 spots in Thursday are filled up. So the one last spot in Wednesday has to be taken by 3. Now this is a must be true question. So I'm going to look for something that says that 3 needs to be in Wednesday or 4 or 7 needs to be on Thursday. No, has to be true. Does that make sense?
Can you say that again one more time?
So if this is a must be true question, I need to know what needs to be true every single time that 6 and 2 are on different days. So
Okay.
has to be on Wednesday every single time, and 4 and 7 has to be in Thursday every single time. I know my answer choice has to be about 3 being in Wednesday or 4 or 7 being in Thursday, because that's the only thing I know has to be true every single time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I can't have an answer choice about 1 or 5 because I don't know what has to be true about 1 or 5. I know what could be true, but I don't know what must be true. So my answer choice has to be about 3, 4, or 7. Make sense? A, exactly 3 bills are paid on Wednesday. Okay, now that I said that my answer choice has to be about 3, 4, 7, I'm gonna put a pin in that because A actually makes a lot of sense. I know that there can only be 3 bills on Wednesday because I know this last spot has to be taken by 1 or 5, and that one spot in Wednesday has to be taken by 3. There can't possibly be 4 things on Wednesday because if there was, then it would be 6, 1, 5, and 3, but then 1 and 5 can't be together. So do you guys understand why there can only possibly be 3 things on Wednesday? So I'm actually going to pick A as my answer choice, but let's take a look at everything else and see why that's wrong. Exactly 3 bills are paid on Thursday, but we know that exactly 4 of them are being paid on Thursday. So I know that B can't be right. Does that make sense? C, bill 1 is paid on the same day as bill 4. That could be true. Does that have to be true? No. So it's not going to be my answer because I'm looking for the thing that has to be true. Bill 2 is paid on the same day as bill 3. That's definitely not true. I know that 2 is on Thursday and 3 is on Wednesday. So even if it can't even be true. Like it can't possibly be true in any sense. Make sense? Okay. And then E says bill 5 is paid on the same day as bill 7. And we have the same situation as answer choice C. It could be true, but it doesn't have to be true. And I'm looking for the thing that has to be true every single time. So I'd cross off E2. Does that make sense to everyone why A is the right answer? Or does anyone have any question? Okay. Number 4 says if bill 6 is paid on Wednesday, then which one of the following must also be paid on a Wednesday? The great thing about number 4 is that we made a diagram in number 3 for it. We put Wednesday we put 6 in Wednesday, and then we filled out the rest of it. Because if we know that 6 is in Wednesday, 2 is already on Thursday, we know that 4 and 7 have to be in Thursday too, which leaves 1 and 5 in a kind of limbo where they could go either way, and 3 has to go on a Wednesday.
Mm.
So do you even bother diagramming at this point, or do you just pick 3 because you know it has to be true?
I mean, I would pick 3 because you know it has to be true.
Does that make sense to everyone? Why you can use a diagram from number 3 to answer number 4? Does anyone have questions so far? Okay. Number 5 says, if bill 4 is paid on Thursday, which one of the following is a pair of bills that could also be paid on a Thursday? So we set up our little chart. We know that 2 is always going to be on Thursday, so I put that there. And we know that 4 and 7 are also going to be on a Thursday. Now we check and see what else could be paid on a Thursday. A says 1 and 5. And we know that's wrong because our rules say that 1 and 5 can never be together. Good? B, 1 and 7. I plug it in and I see if it works. If I put 1 here, then I'd put 6, 3, and 5 here. Does this work with my diagram and my rules?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is going to be my answer because I'm looking for could be true. This could be true, so I pick it. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, Carson, I got a question. Could you just use your last chart that you drew instead of drawing a new one to make that inference?
Yeah, you could.
Okay.
Does everyone understand why you could use the diagram from number 3 to answer number 5 as well?
Which one are we saying is the right answer for this one? Sorry, is which letter?
B, 1 and 7.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Thank you.
You guys want to see the wrong answers too?
Yeah, can we actually? Because I'm just curious to see how it like pans out.
Sure. So C says 3 and 5. So we'd put in 2, 4, and 7 here. And we know that there can only be one more possible thing paid on Thursday, right? We know that they have to be in like 3 or 4.
Mhm.
So can we possibly fit 3 and 5 in Thursday on top of 2, 4, and 7?
No.
No. So C can't be my right answer either. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
Look at D. D says 3 and 6. And the same thing here. Can I possibly fit another thing on top of 2, 4, and 7?
You can fit one number, but you can't fit 2.
You can't fit 2. And the last thing is 6.
Yeah, no. Okay.
2, 4, 7, 6, which would leave me with 1 and 3 and 5 here, but we know that 1 and 5 can't go in the same group. Does that make sense to everyone why B is the right answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Sorry, I was just gonna say we know 1 and 5 can't fit in the same group, but we also know 6 and 7 can't be in the same group too. On the Thursday side.
Yeah. Yes.
Cool.
Anyone have any questions before I go to number 6? Okay. This says which one of the following statements must be true? Ronley, if you were confused about how to do a must be true, like brute forcing, this is a great way to see it because I can brute force this.
Great.
So for number 6, I'd set up my diagram and then I'd set up rows for each answer choice. Oh my God, so for A, it says if bill 2 is paid on Thursday, bill 3 is paid on a Wednesday. So what I do is, well, I know that 2 has to be on a Thursday every single time. But I'm gonna see if I can put 3 on Thursday and still make my diagram work. So if I do that, then maybe I put 4 and 7 here, 1 here, and 6 and 5 over here. And that doesn't break any rules. So I know that this could work, which means I don't need it to be true that 3 is always paid on a Wednesday. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions about how I approached A or why I did what I did? Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing for B. B says if bill 4 is paid on a Thursday, bill 1 is paid on Wednesday. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 2, 4, and 7 on Thursday. And it says bill 1 must be paid on a Wednesday. So I'm going to see, okay, well, what if I put 1 in Thursday? Is my diagram still going to work? So I plug in 1, and I plug in 6, 3, and 5 here. And I know that my diagram can still work even though 1 isn't on a Wednesday. So 1 doesn't have to be on a Wednesday, so it's not my answer because I'm looking for the thing that has to be true every single time. Make sense so far?
Okay, so you're literally just plugging in, okay, onto one side. Okay, sorry, it's starting to come to me.
I'm doing a thing, if they're telling me that something has to be in one spot, I'm gonna put it somewhere else. And if my diagram still works, I know the answer choice doesn't have to be true every single time. If they're saying
Got it.
it has to be Wednesday, but I plug in 1 on Thursday and that still works, I know that 1 doesn't have to be on a Wednesday. That doesn't have to be true. So it can't be my
Okay,
choice.
got it, got it.
Does anyone have any questions about this method? Okay. So C says if bill 4 is paid on Thursday, so again, I'm going to put in 247, bill 3 is paid on Wednesday. Now this is going to be my right answer choice because if I plug in 3 on Thursday, I'd be left with 6, 5, and 1 on Wednesday. And I know that 5 and 1 have to be on different groups. So if I put in 3 on Thursday, my diagram breaks. I know that it has to be true that bill 3 has to be paid on a Wednesday if bill 4 is paid on a Thursday. So this is my answer choice because this has to be true every single time for my diagram to work. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you guys want to see the wrong answers too? Like D and E? Okay. D says if bill 6 is paid on a Thursday, bill 3 is also paid on Thursday. So I'm going to put in 2 and 6 on Thursday and put 3 on Wednesday. If bill 6 is on a Thursday, then I'm going to leave 4 and 7 here and then put 1 over here and 5 over here. My diagram still works even though I put 3 in a Wednesday and on a Thursday. So I know that this doesn't have to be true. Make sense? And then E says if bill 6 is paid on Thursday, bill 4 is also paid on Thursday. I'm not going to diagram that because D did the same thing. Bill 6 was paid on a Thursday and I put bill 4 on a Wednesday and it still worked. They didn't need to be in the same days. So I can cross that out too. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions about this game? Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Shreya can do her game. And remember to pin her paper.
I just turned my screen back on to the one that has the paper on it. If you guys want to pin that one. And just to go over really quickly, sorry, okay, I just pinned mine. So for that game that we just did, if something couldn't go in one column, it had to go in the other column, right? That helped us make so many inferences. Like if 3 wasn't on Wednesday, then it had to be on Thursday, right? And so that's characteristic of an in and out game. And all in and out games are just grouping games. So that was a grouping game. In and out games are like a subcategory of grouping games, if that makes sense. So that's not essential for you guys to know right now, but just in case if you wanted to know, that is a grouping game, but it's also an in and out game. Okay, so the game that I'm doing is from Prep Test 19. It's game 4. And it starts out by saying each of 9 students, F, G, H, J, K, L, M, N, P, will be assigned to exactly one of 3 panels, O, R, and W. Exactly 3 of the students will be assigned to each panel. The assignment of students to panels must meet the following conditions. So I would start by making my columns first. So I would make O, R, and W as the different columns. And then for my rules, F and G have to be assigned together. So this is how I would write that rule, that F and G are always going together. And then K is always assigned to the same panel as Marcus. So K and M also always going together. And then the next rule says F is not assigned to the same panel as P. How would you guys write that rule? You could write it separately from these two rules, but you could actually connect it to one of these rules. If F is not assigned to the same panel as P, how could we attach that to one of these rules?
F and G.
Yeah, exactly. We could attach it to the F and G one. So if P is never going with F, P is also never going with G, right? Because F and G are always going together. So how I would write that rule in is I would just go like that. And that represents the same thing. Faith is not assigned to the same panel as Paul. And then G is not assigned to the same panel as H. Very similar to the last rule, we can attach that to this, right? If G is not going to the same panel as H, then basically H is not going to show up in whatever column F and G show up in. And then the next rule is J is not assigned to the same panel as K. Again, we can attach this rule, right? J is not going to the same panel as K. And then the last rule is a conditional statement that's saying Harlan is not assigned to the oceans panel if Paul is not assigned to the oceans panel. So you can write this by saying if Paul is not assigned to the oceans panel, then Harlan is not assigned to the oceans panel, right? Since both sides of this are only relevant to one column, when that happens in grouping games, I just write it above this column because then I just know that this is the only place it's relevant anyways. So if Paul is not assigned here, right, H is not assigned here. And the contrapositive of that is if H is here, then P is also here, right? So this is how I would prefer to write this rule. So it's like more integrated into the diagram. And those are all of the rules. Do you guys have any questions on any of these rules or how I got there?
I guess I'm a little confused on that contrapositive.
Yeah, of course.
So if P's not there, H doesn't have to be there. But if H is there, why does P have to be there?
Okay, yeah. So how do you take a contrapositive?
I understand you do the opposite. I guess I just don't understand why the P has to be there if the H is there. Why can't P go in R if H is in O?
Okay, so if H is an O, right. So then if P goes somewhere else, right, let's just try that out. So if H is here and then P goes somewhere else, right, all of a sudden we don't have P in this column, so we can't have H in this column either.
Got it. Thanks.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Just click slowly.
No, for sure, for sure. So contrapositives, sometimes it's not always intuitive why the contrapositive holds, right? But you kind of just have to trust the process. And if you're ever like questioning it, it's totally fine to question it on whenever you're like practicing, right? But on the exam, just like trust that it works and move on.
Right.
Because sometimes you end up with you end up with a chain of contrapositives, right? And then you won't have the time to like check everything. So for sure, check now. But sometimes you just have to trust it and move on.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions about any of the rules or anything else that's going on? Okay, so first question. So when I've combined my rules, I find it easier to just check with like the combined rule, right? So I'm just gonna go through each one and check that F and G are together and they're not with H or P. Let me know if that's too confusing of like a chunk to start with. But I would just go through and look at A and see, okay, are F and G together and are they with H or P? F and G are together and H and P do not show up next to them. For B, F and G are not together, so I would just cross B out. C, F and G are together and they're not with P or H. D, F and G are together and they're not with P or H. E, F and G are together and they're not with P or H. So I would leave those open. The next rule that I have is K and M are together and they're not with J. So K and M are not together in A. So I'd cross that out. K and M are together in C and they're not with J. In D, K and M are together, but they're with J. So I would cross that out. And then the last rule we have is that if P is not there, H can't be there, or if H is there, P has to be there. So C, we have H, but we don't have P, right? In oceans, we have H, but we don't have P. So I would cross C out. And that leaves us with E as our answer. Does that make sense what I did for that process? Okay.
Do you guys understand why it's possible that P could be an O without H there?
No?
Does
No.
P stand alone?
Okay, so remember how we talked about how a sufficient condition is enough to make a necessary condition happen? Okay, when you flip it and you say H, if H is there, then P is there. But then if you negate that original statement, you say, okay, well, if P, then H, that's going to be incorrect. That's a mistaken negation. So if you negate it right across and you say if P, then H, that makes no sense. I know what happens when you don't have P, and I know what happens when you have H. I can't work backwards from the necessary condition and then move forward to the sufficient condition.
So just to repeat exactly what Akarshna said, like when she said like this is if you have not P or if you have H, you know what to do from there, right? If you have not P, then you know, okay, you can't have H there. Or if you have,
Oh,
you
but
know,
we don't have if P, then what? Got it.
we have nothing about if P, right? Like if P, we don't know. We don't know what's going on. So that's
Tricky,
why,
tricky.
yeah. So for any conditional statement, don't try to focus on this side of them when you're trying to read them, right? If this side is not met, the conditional statement doesn't even follow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You just want to keep an eye out for what's going on this side. If you don't have H or if you have P, you know nothing about those things.
Shiesty.
Gotcha. So I would write this combination out: K M P H J N and F G L. I'll just rewrite the JN there. Okay, next question. So the next question is asking if Marcus and Paul are both assigned to the wetlands panel, right? So they're saying if M and P are here, which one of the following must be true? So what do we know if M and P are here? Like, what is the next step that we can take? Just not
Okay, is there?
exactly, yeah. K is here, and we know that from this rule, right? And one of the things that they told us in the above the rules, right, was that exactly 3 students will be assigned to each panel. So now this panel is full. Does that make sense? There can't be any more letters here. So this one's done. And then so now we know P didn't show up in this column, right? So where is H going?
In oceans.
It will go in R, right?
Yeah, it would have to go in R because if P's
Oh,
H can't be here, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
H has to show up here. And if H is showing up here, where do we know F and G are going?
that's going in O.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think that's as far as we can get in terms of inferences, right? Like we know where F and G has to go because of H, because they can't go together. So that's as far as we can go. The letters that we have left are N, L, and J. So since this is a must be true question, it's going to be asking us about one of these letters here. Right, so A is saying Harlan is assigned to the recycling panel. That's going to be our answer. That is something that must be true, right? Everything that we did was solely based off of our rules, right? We didn't say like, oh, H could go in O or R, so we're just going to put it in one. Everything we did was based off our rules. Just to see why the other answers don't work, Jennifer is assigned to the oceans panel. We don't know whether that must be true, right? Jennifer could also be assigned here. K is assigned to the recycling panel. That's not true, right? K has to be in the wetlands panel. And then L is assigned to the wetlands panel. Definitely not, because the wetlands panel is already full. And then N is assigned to the oceans panel. That could be true, but doesn't have to be true because N could also be assigned here. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. And then the next question, which one of the following is a pair of students who could be assigned to the same panel as one another? So we're looking for two people that can go together. One way to do this is just to look at your past combinations and see if anything works. So F and H aren't together here or here. G and P, no and no. H and M, no, we don't have that. F and M, we also don't have that in either row. And then J and M, we also don't have that in either row. So since we're not sure here, it just makes sense to do like each one, consider each one in isolation. So F and H, can F and H go together?
No.
No, we know that just from this rule, right? That was an advantage of like combining these rules, is that now we know, okay, like F and H can't go together, and G and P, right? Those also can't go together. And that's
Right.
also something we know from combining these rules. The initial rule just told us G and F and P can't go together, but we know from writing it this way that G and P also can't go together. Next is H and M. What do you guys think?
Yes, they can go together.
It seems like they could, right? So I would just leave that one open. F and M.
Yeah.
Yeah.
F and M.
But F needs G. No, it would be over, right? Because F needs G and K needs M.
Exactly. So all of a sudden that we would end up with 4 letters in one column, whichever
Yeah.
column we had to put them in. And so that would not work, right? If F and M had to go together, we would have 4 letters instead of 3, and that's going over. So I'd cross that one out. And then J and M.
No.
No.
No, and that's from this rule, right? So J and M also doesn't work. So I would just confidently pick C here because we know all the other ones can't work. If we had 2 open, then, you know, I would have just tried each one out and see if they could go together. And then 23 is asking about K and P both being assigned to recycling. So if K and P are both in recycling, what do we know from there?
You need M.
Exactly. And that's from this rule, right? Because we have K here, so we need M here. Perfect. And then we know this is full, right? Sorry, that was a really bad M. But we know this is full, right?
Yes.
Because it already has 3 letters. And then where can we go from here?
H could, wait, I'm just throwing this out there. Can H be an O?
Good question. Can H be an O? So
No.
P is already been used, right?
Right.
Right. So as soon as we put P somewhere else, we know that H can't go in O, right? That's
Yeah.
the conditional statement here. P
Okay.
is an O, so H can't be an O. But that's a great thing to look at because where does H have to go?
W.
Exactly. Yeah. H has to go in W. And very similar to the last time we did this, right? Like if you look for H in our rules, okay, this is where H is in our rules. We know H can't go with F or G. Where does that mean we put F and G?
O.
Exactly. So F and G are going here. And then very similar to the last time that we did this, like N, L, and J are the ones left over. So the reason why N and L are the floaters, and that's why they're usually left over, that makes sense. J is left over because K and M, J just can't go with them, but they're already full, like the place where they're at. So that doesn't really tell us whether J can go in O or W. So all 3 of those are left over. So since it's a could be true question, it's going to be asking about N, L, or J being in either wetlands, right? There's 2 spots left here or here, right? So it's going to be about N, L, and J being either in wetlands or oceans. Does that make sense for why that would be the case for a could be true question? Because we know all of this must be true, right? The F being here, the G being here, the K, P, M, the H, that's all must be true stuff. The stuff that's left over for things that could be true or could be false, like the stuff that could happen, it's these 3 spaces here under oceans and wetlands, and it's involving N, L, or J. So the only one that involves N, L, or J, the only 2 are D and E. And E is about recycling though. And we know that L can't go in recycling because that's full, right? So D would be our answer. J can be assigned to wetlands, right? Because J is one of the ones we haven't assigned somewhere yet and it could go in wetlands. Just to look at the other ones, Faith is assigned to wetlands. That can't happen, right? Because we already assigned F to oceans. And then G is assigned to recycling. That can't happen because we already assigned G to oceans. H is assigned to oceans. That can't happen because we already assigned H to wetlands. And then that just leaves us with D. Does that make sense? Okay, let me know. Stop me if you guys have any questions. Sorry, I feel like I'm going through this kind of quickly.
Should we put J in like a placeholder in wetlands, or does it not matter?
Good question. Yeah. So if something, you don't have to, but if you want to, you could. I prefer like leaving them open, right? Because I know that any of them could go anywhere at this point, and that way, if I had a question in the future where I had to look back for something, like I know I could fill this with like N, L, or J.
Okay.
And to me, that's helpful because I can see that this can be filled with N, L, or J. But if that's confusing for you for any reason and you'd rather just fill them in, go ahead and fill them in. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I did literally what we did like last week from sequences. Like I did N-L-J for each of those and then just like put them in a box so I can figure out like where the hell I'm supposed to.
Yep. So whenever I have more than 2 letters, sometimes I just didn't have enough space here.
Yeah.
Because I wrote it kind of small. That was my bad. But yeah, you can definitely do that. And usually when that happens, you're stuck between 2 or 3 letters anyways. So you can like squeeze them in and it's not a big deal for sure. So you can just write N/L/J for all of these 3 spaces.
Cool.
Yep. And then the last question, each of the following is a pair of students who could be assigned to the same panel as each other, except. So they're saying like which 2 letters can't go together. This is very similar to that other question that we had, right? In terms of like looking at which 2 letters, can go together. So looking at our rules again, G and K, can G and K go together?
Yes.
Okay, if we put G and K together, aren't we?
Oh no, it's going to be too many.
Exactly. It's going to be too many. And that's something that's not super easy to see, right? You just really have to be keeping in mind that you only have 3 spaces per group. And that's what I said when I was like going over at the beginning about like the big picture stuff. Remember how one of them was like, remember the numbers? I know that's really vague, but a lot of times they'll give you that kind of stuff, not in the rules, but earlier on, right? And if you're not sure whether you can remember it, I would just write it in as a rule. Right? Like, so here you could have just written in like 3, you could even draw 3, like, make it so you have 3 columns in each, or maybe you want to like write 3 dashes every time you're doing a new row, if that would help. But, or you can write it in as a literal rule, you could be like O, R, W, and then you could put 3 each, right? Whatever helps you remember that, you will want to do that, because that, if you don't realize that, that makes the game much harder for you, right?
Right.
And they give that kind of stuff to you like in the opening a lot of times, so it might not be given as a rule, but you want to make sure that you don't skim through that entirely, because then you might end up missing something like that.
So does that mean it's A?
Exactly. Yep. The answer here is A. And we can check the rest of them really quickly. So like G and L. Are G and L ever going to have an issue being together?
No.
No, because L is a floater, right? L is one of the letters that we don't really have any rules about. So it doesn't make sense that they would be like restricted in that way. K and N.
Same.
Same thing, exactly. L and M.
No.
Yeah, same thing. L is still a floater, right? Exactly. And then L and P.
Floater.
Exactly, floater. So B, C, D, and E were all very similar in that like they just asked about floaters, and so there's really no restriction there. G and K, however, can't go together because all of a sudden you have 4 letters together. Do you guys have any general questions about this game or any thoughts? Concerns? How was it? Was it really hard?
For me personally, it's easy whenever I'm doing it with you, but whenever I get by myself, I'm just like all over.
That's fair. I
So,
think what makes this game much, much easier is if you connect these rules, right? If you weren't able to connect these rules, it makes it so much harder to answer some of these questions, right?
yeah, it did make more sense whenever you put the P and the H and the J. Like it seemed more simpler. But if I was doing this on my own, I probably would have been like, okay, it probably wouldn't took me longer than this. So it did make more sense to put the P and the H and the J. Like, you know.
In terms of how to connect rules, that definitely becomes simpler and simpler over time. For which question? For 24, it was A. So wait, I can just go through all of them again. 20, it was E. And then 21, it was A. 22, it was C. 23, it was D. And then 24, it was A. So it gets easier and easier to connect the rules the more games that you do. You can just see how they connect and whether or not they connect. But at the beginning, if you want to get better at that, I would just encourage you to know every time you're like trying to write down a rule, just see if you have another rule with that letter already. And if you want to connect them, you can see whether that's possible.
It's super normal that you guys can easily understand things while we're doing games with you, and then you're struggling on your own. Games are not easy for most people. But the good thing is they're very learnable. So the more and more you practice, the more and more it's gonna become like second nature to you.
Yep. And the more and more like you'll build your own intuition or your own like strategies for doing things because everyone's mind works like a little bit differently. And so the more and more you do them, like you'll be finding ways to simplify them for yourself. And so that's where you like really make a lot of improvement in time and everything.
That game went by really quick.
Yeah.
Do we want to do another game? Because
Yeah. Would you guys want to see another game or would you guys want to go over some more like general strategy type things? Like what do you guys want to do?
or did you have any questions from homework?
Could we go over the homework, the translating LG rules?
Yeah, we can go over like the drill.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any
I'm actually curious how you guys diagram some of them because like I notice one of the things that I get stuck on is like when I'm diagramming and trying to connect them simultaneously, I then lose sight of like, oh wait, we don't actually know where this letter stands in front of or behind like certain other letters, if that makes sense.
right.
Probably not, but
Yeah. Let me know. Like, do you guys have specific questions on that drill or would you just like to go over all of it?
the one I ended up getting all of these right. Like practice test number 48, section 2, game 2 was one, but I'm sure people have other questions too. So by all means, please.
Okay, we can go over that one. Did someone say they had a question about the drill or was that just, I might have been making that up.
Oh, that was me. I want to just go over the drill itself. Nothing in particular, just the annotations and stuff.
In general? Yeah, of course. I can just take, were any of them in particular confusing or was it just like in general?
The second page for part 1, where it talks about less popular and yeah, that second page kind of threw me.
Gotcha. Okay. So the reason why I included that one is because what that says is P and S are less popular than Q. Why I included that one is because remember when Akarshna last week, she mentioned that sometimes you need to write in like different sides if it's not clear what the order is for the sequencing game. So if you have a general like sequencing game and they're talking about more or less popular, if it's not super instinctive whether more popular goes this way or that way, right? So you'll need to label it in. You might need to write like more popular and like less popular, right? And so if they're telling us that P and S are less popular than Q, then P and S would be closer to the less popular side than Q would be. And on the answer key for that, I wrote in like less popular and more popular and did it according to that. Does that make sense?
It does not. I just haven't seen a lesson sign in so long.
No, it's fair. Yeah, and I think the main thing here is that when something like that happens, you just really want to make sure you like put this into your diagram, because a lot of times people like confuse themselves halfway through and they keep having to look back to see what they initially decided was more or less popular. One other tip here is that it's really good to see what the first question puts as more or less popular, like whether they're going from more popular to less popular or from less popular to more popular. Because if you do your diagram the same way, you're never going to have to like flip it in your head to match theirs, if that makes sense.
Right. The first question will say, give us a possible combination of these people ranked from least popular to most popular, in which case, you know, the least popular is coming on the left side. But they can also say, give us the rank from most popular to least popular, in which case the most popular would come first. So if you're not quite sure which way to set up, look at the first question and see if they're asking for a combination. And if they are, they're going to present an answer in a way that your diagram can also be built. You don't have to build it that way. It just might make sense if you're not quite good at diagramming.
Yeah. And if you happen to build it the opposite way, what that would mean is that you would have to read it backwards, right? Like if they're saying from less popular to more popular, you would have to start with this letter. Does that make sense? You would have to be looking at it this way.
I got a question. So if we're saying Q is less popular than P and S, so Q would go towards the least popular side, and P and S would go more popular side, a bit closer to the more popular side.
Yes, that's definitely true. What I initially said was P and S are each less popular than Q, but you're completely right. If I said Q was less popular, then this would just almost like flip, right?
Okay, so we're saying P and S is less popular than Q right here.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what this is saying.
So P and S would go to the less popular side then.
Right, and this is the less popular side here.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're closer to the less popular side, and then Q is more popular than them, so Q is closer to the more popular side. So these are all real rules from real games. I didn't like make them up in my head. I just like went through some games and picked out some rules here and there.
Thank you. And in the conditional statement, that whole chain messed me up.
That's very fair. So if you're not there yet, don't worry about it. The only reason that helps is when you get a game like that, it's so much faster if you're able to chain your rules. If you can't, you can still finish the game. It's just going to take you a little bit longer. So that's more of something that you might want to look back at, you know, maybe when you're more advanced at games, and see if it's any easier then. We can also go over that right now. Like, is there a specific one you wanted to go over for the conditional one?
We can do the first one, the A to B, C, D, and then B and C. That was
Of course. So that very first one, actually, I think that one's really good to practice, because I think you guys should be able to do that one. So games, when they give you individual statements like this, they assume that you will understand that, like, if you have, let's just say they give you A, right? Then what do you know from there?
A, then B.
Yeah, and then you have B. And then if you have B, what happens?
You have C.
You have C.
And then D.
And then D, exactly, right? So all chaining means is that, like, you just want to make that very clear to yourself, because sometimes they give you things all over the place, right? It won't look like this. Like, some stuff will be negated, it'll be letters all over the alphabet, and it'll just look kind of crazy. But like, it's simpler to do this, right? And to get here, if you chained it for yourself and just wrote out if A, then B, then C, then D, right? Then you automatically know if you have A, you have all of these things. If you have B, you have C and D. If you have C, you just have D.
It's also worth it, I think, to write the contrapositive just in case. Like, I would have the chain, then I also write if not D, then not C, then not B, then not A, because I know what happens in a literal step by step. So if I don't have D, then I know that I don't have C, B, or A. If I don't have C, then I know that I don't have B or A. And if I don't have B, then I know that I don't have A. So do you guys see how that works? How if you start at one spot, you have the next things after it, but if you start in the middle, you only have a couple things after it. So if you start at D, you don't know anything about D. And if you start at not B, then you don't know anything about D and C. Does that make sense?
Is it possible to negate it also as just like, what if we skip the chain part of it and just said, if not D, then not A? Is that the same thing?
If not D, then not A. Is that the same thing? Kind of, because like, can you get that from this? Yes. But if you just wrote that in your as your rule instead of this, that wouldn't
Yeah,
be,
you missed like B and C.
yeah, you miss everything else because sometimes they could be like, what happens if you have B?
Yeah,
Right?
no, absolutely. I'm just curious if it does mean the same thing. I think is really.
It does. Yeah. If you have D, then you know, sorry, if you're missing D, then you know you're missing A. If you have D, it doesn't mean you have A. So
Cool.
does that answer your question?
Yep.
You can
Totally.
write it like that if you're very intuitive, but again, most of you are beginners, so I would not recommend being that intuitive and just writing if not D, then not A. Write
Yeah.
the down.
It's also like you're missing all of this stuff in the middle, right? And if they ask about some of that, you still want to be able to apply this chain to that. And this is much more helpful than for most people, at least, than like going and doing like random letters and like bouncing back and forth, because sometimes these rules are interspersed with other rules, right? If you have other rules going on, then you might not realize like, oh, I have a rule about what happens when I have B, and like you might never see it. Versus like this, it's very, very like connected and all in one place. And so it's more likely that you're gonna get whatever you need to get. And the game makers, I think, assume that you can do this. Like the games are kind of designed in a way where they want you to be able to realize like the relationship between these. And so if you do this, it usually makes it easier for yourself.
Can I see how you guys would diagram that one, that game 2 from practice test 48? Because I feel like, so I was following like one of the LSAT hack videos. And so I noticed that they start to diagram it almost a little bit like a tree, which is what I started adopting. But then I realized that like, as I'm answering some of the answer choices, I'm actually confusing myself because I'm such a visual learner. So I'm kind of curious to see how you guys would diagram it each and how you'd be able to like stack it up against the questions. I got all the questions right. It's just, so I was like, okay, but I definitely confused myself along the way.
You said it was 48 game 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do it first, Arkarshna, or like we can flip and we can both show how we would do it if it's yeah.
Let me share my screen again. Can you guys see my screen? I'm gonna assume you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, let me read this. A farmer harvests 8 separate fields, so we know we have 8 fields. G, H, J, K, L, M, P, and T. Each field is harvested exactly once, and no 2 fields are harvested simultaneously. So each of them is done only once, and you can't ever do them together. Once the harvesting of a field begins, no other fields are harvested until the harvesting of that field is complete. The farmer harvests the fields in an order consistent with the following conditions. So both P and G are harvested sometime before K. So we have P and G before K. Both H and L, before K. Both H and L are harvested sometime before J. So H and L before J. K is harvested sometime before M, but after L. So L, K, M. And then T is harvested sometime before M. So T before M. So we have a bunch of things overlapping here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see if we can put it together. We know that P, G, and K need to, I wish I didn't write this so big. We know that P, G, and K, L, I meant L. L come before K, which comes before M. We know that T, this is like the most I would chain up, honestly. Because
Okay.
I don't know in reference, we can like, we have H and L come before J and then L comes before K, but we don't know where in reference to J, K comes. So like this is the most I would chain up. I don't know if Shreya disagrees with that, but I don't know much else.
I would say I probably would just chain up all of them, but if that's really confusing to you, don't. Is what I would say.
I personally wouldn't. Like, okay, I know that T comes before M, but where before M? Is it after K? Is it before K? Is it like, I don't know. So I wouldn't do anything with that. So I just make the biggest chain possible and then leave it up to the rest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's why I wanted to ask this question, because this is where I would confuse myself. So like I changed, so then like this is where the tree model comes in, right? So then you put the T sort of like, and you cross it a little bit to that M, and I definitely tried to chain it all up together. And then this is where I confused myself, where I was like, wait a second, but now I don't know where T falls in line with everything else. And like, so then, and I don't know where M really falls in line with everything else, and where does J fall in line with everything else. So then I just like circled it, put question marks. I was like semi-floater. Like I literally was just like,
Right. This is
everywhere.
where Shreya is a little bit more intuitive than I am. She can see these connections better than I can. I am very much get out what you can and then brute force it. Because I know that if I sat here trying to figure out, okay, where in reference to everything else does this fit in, I would drive myself crazy and I would spend 35 minutes getting everything wrong because I spent too much time dying on this hill.
Yeah,
However,
yeah,
when I know that I can write down this one bigger chain, erase this part, and I have like 3 little things to work on. T's before M, H and L's before J, and then I have this one bigger tree. And I can brute force my way pretty quickly through this in about like 5 or 6 minutes, and I'm done. I'm
yeah.
not worry about a bigger tree. Whereas I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you guys can see Shreya's paper.
This is
This
what
is
it
what
would,
Shreya would do.
this is what it would look like if you did chain it together.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
I don't know if you guys want to pin the paper again. This is what it would look like if you chained it together.
Yeah, that's exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason why I do like doing this is because I can see what comes first and what can come first and what can come last, which is helpful for me for a lot of sequencing games like this. So I know P, G, L, or H has to come first, unless there's some letters. I think all letters have been used in this. Yeah, all the letters have been
Yeah,
used.
they were, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I take that back. T can also. So all the letters that don't have any lines before them can come first, right? K has lines before it, J has lines before it, M has lines before it. So those can't come first. So the ones that come first are P, G, L, or H, or T. Sorry, T also doesn't have any lines before it. And then the ones that don't have any lines after are the ones that can be at the end. So which letters don't have any lines after them?
Is it KT and J?
K has a line after it, right?
M and J.
M and
Or
J.
M and J? Okay.
Exactly. T has a line after it, right? So
Oh,
M and J are the only things that can come at the end. And those inferences sometimes come in like really handy for me, like knowing that M and J are the only ones that can come at the end. So that's why I find worth it to do this. But like if this isn't helpful to you, don't do it.
Yeah,
Exactly what I said. Like it's not worth it because it could take you forever if you can't see it, and it's not worth it. If you want to practice doing it now because like you can do them untimed and you can practice it, go for it. And you should like, you can try putting it together because it is possible to put it all together. But like she said, it's not a hill worth dying on.
yeah, this was exactly how I diagrammed it, Surya. And I literally circled the J and the M specifically with like question marks after them so that I could realize that like, oh wait, I don't know what happens after each of these. So I don't know where these fall in line. And so yeah, that's why I was curious to see exactly how you guys do it. Interestingly enough, also I did the exact mirror image of what both of you did. So like, but I managed to diagram it correctly as I was like answering all the questions and everything. So cool.
Both of these diagrams will get you to the right answers.
Yeah.
You just have to know how to work with them. So for me, if I were to use this diagram that Shreya did, I probably would get everything wrong because I would have a harder time reading it. So find what works for you. If it's Shreya's diagram, use that. If it's the way that I did it, use that. If you can think of a different way that works for you, use that. All that matters is that you're reading these rules correctly, that it makes sense to you, and that it leads you to the right answers in a timely fashion. That is it. Past that, as long as you're making the correct choices or interpreting the questions correctly or the rules correctly, you're fine. Games at one point come to like a personal choice. You can make a choice about how to write them down.
Cool.
Any other questions, either about this or about any of the other stuff that we've done today?
Can we try one more conditional statements, like the second one with the squiggly line before the R?
Yeah, of course. Let me pull it up again. So, okay, gotcha. So that one was basically, these are the 3 statements that were given and you were asked to chain them. So if M, then K, if not R, then T, if R, then not K. So a lot of times this is what it will look like when you're expected to change statements. It's not always super easy to do it. And if you can't do it, like exactly what we've been talking about, even with the sequencing game, like it's not a hill to die on. Like if you can't do it, don't worry about it. If you can do it, it usually makes your life a little bit easier in the long run. But it's totally up to you whether you want to. Do you guys have any idea of how you'd start to chain these?
Contrapositive the M and K. So not K, not M.
Yep, exactly. So one way to decide like what you need a contrapositive of is like find a letter that's the same, right? You have two Ks here and one's here and one's here. If the Ks are on the same side, they can definitely be chained directly. Like if one of them is crossed out and one of them is not. So if you did the contrapositive of this, it would be if not K, then not M, right? And you can directly link that to what's down here, right? That's if not K, then not M. And once you have this statement in here, like you don't need this anymore.
And then can you do it with that second line too, contra that also to then add it to that third line somehow?
Yep.
Not
So the
T-
contrapositive of that would be what?
Not T
Not
then.
T, then R.
Exactly. So not T, then R. Where would that fit into our chain so far?
Before the R.
Exactly, right before the R. So if not T, then R, right? And now that we've integrated that in as well, we don't need this. And then what Akarshna said, like you probably just want to write the contrapositive of this. So the contrapositive of this is, does anyone want to try taking a stab at it?
Is it M
Mhm.
and then to K and then not R and then regular T?
Yep, exactly. So then you could work with these two statements. And basically, just so that you guys like feel confident about it, if the question was like, okay, if you know that you have K, what happens? What would you guys say?
Then we don't have R
Then you don't have R and
and we have T.
exactly. What you want to do is find the letter or like the thing that they're talking about and then just follow the chain. And so if they tell you like, you don't have M, do you know what's going on?
Yeah.
If you don't have M, you don't really know anything about that.
Oh yeah.
That's already at the end of the chain, right? So this stuff you have the least information on. This stuff you have the most information on, right? If you know that you don't have T, you know a bunch about what's going on. Same with if you have M, you know a bunch about what's going on. Versus these, like you have no idea what's going on if you don't have M or if you have T.
Everything that happens before it is a sufficient condition, which means that it's enough to make that thing happen, but you don't need that to make not M happen. You could have some other way to get to not M, and you could have some other way to get to T. You don't need M, K, or not R to get to T. Those will make it happen, but it's not the only thing. Does that make sense to everyone? Why you can't work backwards from not M or T and then go backwards to everything else?
So just to check, like, would it be okay to have not M, right? And then to have T. Would that be okay?
No.
Why not? Why is that not okay?
Because you need M to get to T.
Okay, so all we know here is that we have M. I mean, we don't have M and that we have T. You don't need M to get to T. M is good enough to get to T. Does that make sense? Like you should only ever be looking at the letters that you know about. So we know about T here. So we look at T. We have no information after T. So we don't know anything about like what happens after we have T. Same with this. If we don't have M, we look at this by itself and then go to the right. And we don't know anything about what happens when we don't have M. Does that make sense? Like you go and find these letters in the chain and then you only look to the right of that.
Having M is enough to make T happen, but you don't need M for T to happen. Like that's not necessary. That's why we call it sufficient conditions and necessary conditions. M is not necessary.
So like basically think about it as whatever letter like you have or you're given, whatever you're given, you just want to go and find that in the chain, and that sets off the chain from that point onwards, right? So what happens like if we have K?
If you have K, then you don't have R, but you do have T.
Exactly. Yep. And then so just like that, what happens if we don't have M?
We don't know.
We don't know. And then what happens if we have T?
We don't know.
We don't know exactly. And so like, but similarly, if we don't have T, what do we know?
We have R, we don't have K, and we don't have M.
Exactly. Yep.
I can do this with you on here, but if I was to do this by myself, girl, it wouldn't look the same.
If you had to like take away how to do this, it's basically just finding what you're given in the chain and then just looking to the right of that, right? Like from that point onwards, the chain gets like set in motion, but anything before that, you don't know what's going on.
So if you get confused, something that I would recommend is for now, if they say you have K, cover up that first part of the statement. Cover up anything that that comes before K. Just put your hand over it and then read whatever's to the right. You don't know anything before that. So if they said not R, cover up the first two things and then read not R to T. So you only know it's coming after that arrow. Does that make sense to everyone?
So what these become really helpful for are in and out games. And we're going over that in the next class anyways. So we can even pick a game where like, you know, you'll have to like maybe chain something small and we'll show you like how that can help you with the game. But what Akarshna said is really good advice. Like just cover up everything before the letter that you're looking at. And so then you know the only thing you can get from not R is just T, right? There is all this stuff before not R, but we don't know anything about that from just having not R. It's like if you wanted me to go back to like the fruit and apple example, right? Like if it's an apple, then it's a fruit, right? What else can we add on either side of that? Maybe if it's a fruit, then it grew on a tree, right? And if it grew on a tree, it like needed water, right? If it needed water, does that make it an apple? If it needed water, do we know anything about whether something was an apple or not?
No.
No, that's why you can't go back on the chain. Because if you know something needed water to grow for whatever reason, you have no idea whether that thing was an apple or not, or whether it was a fruit or not, or even whether it was a tree, right? Maybe the thing that needed water was a swimming pool. Like you have no idea. So I think I made Akarshna laugh.
We were talking about food and then you brought up a swimming pool. I was like, what?
I was just trying to say like something else might need water that's
No,
not.
you're totally right. It just like caught me
not-
off guard. I was like, what the hell?
No, yeah. I guess I was just trying to say like you just have no idea, right? You can't start making assumptions about the other stuff. You just know that if it's an apple, then everything follows in this chain. If it's an apple, has to be a fruit, has to have grown on a tree, has to have had water. It had water. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so like this is I guess like the reason why like with meaning involved, why this is the way that it is, right? Like why you have to use the way that you're supposed to use it. You can't assume things just from knowing this, you can't assume stuff that's coming before on the chain because it just doesn't work that way. And hopefully that's easier to see when like meaning is involved. Do you guys have any other questions either about this or like the other examples that we had down here? The reason why I gave you guys so many similar examples for the chaining is because it takes practice to chain things. Like you can't do it once and be like, oh, I got this and I can apply it on games now. Like it does not work that way. Usually for chaining, like you want to repeat it for yourself like a couple times back to back so that you can really get comfortable with it. because it's hard sometimes to even realize like, oh, I can chain two rules that have the same letter, because sometimes one letter will be crossed out and one won't be crossed out. And so you might think like, can I combine those? You know, like, can I combine those? One is not R and one is R. The answer is yes. It's just going to take you some time to like realize that as soon, like immediately, right? It takes time. And so that's why there's so many of those. Don't feel the pressure to like go through all of them now. You can even do them later. Any other like thoughts, questions, concerns?
These are all great questions, by the way.
Yeah.
Will you
Okay.
guys shoot over the homework over email or?
I'm about to share my screen so we can talk about homework, and then I'll email it too. So every time we're done with class, I basically put this up on YouTube and I wait for this to like download because it takes forever because it's so long. And then I email you guys right after it uploads. So I will list the homework in that, but I'll also show it to you now on the PowerPoint so you can write it down really quickly. I'm gonna share my screen. I can talk about homework. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so the two games that Tree and I recommend that you do are PT 69 Game 2 and PT 38 Game 3. We really recommend that you do them, and we would like for you to do them. And the other games, if you have time and you'd like to get more practice, we also recommend those. I'm going to email this to you guys again. The one thing that I'd like for you to try and continue doing is Sudoku. It really helps. And I'm going to show you this cool website that I really like because it helps you with think about games when you're not doing games. Ronley and I went over it when we were doing office hours, but it's basically a logic puzzle game where the diagram is built for you. You go on this website, you click start new puzzle, you set whatever kind of grid you want, and then your difficulty range, and then you create your puzzle. You start your puzzle, and basically what it does is it gives you your scenario, and then your rules, and then this is the active grid for you to work on. It's your diagram. So this is a great way to start thinking about games when you're not doing games. Like if you're on a car ride and you can't study for logic games, so you want to think about it and still build up the skills, this is a great way to do it. Sudoku is also a great way to do that. So I would really recommend these, and I'll send this website out too. Tria, anything else to add about this?
No, other than I had to do this for like extra credit in math in high school sometimes. And I do think it has like the same exact skills you need for logic games, right? It's like asking you to think about what can't go where and like where can things go and all of those same things that logic games use. So it's definitely a great idea for improving logic games, like the skills that you use when you don't have time or maybe you're like, busy and like running around, like you can take this and do this on your phone. So
The only thing that sucks about this is a diagram is a little bit hard to figure out, and like it's kind of hard to figure out what they're asking you to do. So like look around and play around with it on YouTube, or if you have any questions, feel free to email one of us or text one of us. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else. Shree, do you have anything else? Or Nicole, do you have anything? Or Janati, if she's still here?
I will say we're gonna upload video explanations of the homework games eventually. So you guys will have those. So if you guys want to check the video explanations, you guys will have those.
Some of them. We'll try to do like the ones that are required first, and we'll do them really well, and then we'll try to get through all of them. But if there's one in particular that you're really struggling with, just make sure you send it to us on Slack so that we know, hey, we should do this game. Because we want to get to the ones that most people are struggling with sooner rather than later.
And again,
And the other thing is like make sure or feel completely comfortable to send us feedback to after class of, hey, like if you're a little bit nervous to ask questions during class, just shoot one of us a message and say, hey, I wish we would go over this more, or this part was a little bit confusing, just so that we can continue to tailor this class for everybody's needs.
Anyone have any last minute questions? Or if you want to talk about feedback now too, like we can do that too. But do you guys have anything else for us that you want to talk about or address? Any questions about games or homework or anything that we can help you with right now?
No, just to reassure, office hours are Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 Eastern time.
So I'm gonna send an email just to remind everyone, but Tuesday's office hours are gonna be at 8:15 p.m. And Friday will likely be at 8 p.m. I haven't quite set Friday yet, just because I don't know what the rest of my week is gonna look like yet, but it'll likely be at like 7, 8, or 9 p.m., like somewhere in the nighttime range so that the Pacific Coast folks can also join us.
I think.
Yep. Anyone have any other questions? And feel free to contact us at any time. Like someone specifically requested that I do office hours on Friday this week instead, and I can I am more than happy to do that. So if you have any specific requests, like feel free to ask us. We can try and like figure that out for you.
And I just sent a link in the chat for the Slack communication. So if you are not on our Slack board, go ahead and click on that. That's the easiest way to communicate with us, just since so many people, multiple tutors are checking it. Where if you just send a question to one of us, if someone's off that day or someone's in the middle of a session, it's kind of hard to respond to. And then I'll also send the link to the website where we upload all the videos too, just once more in case people have struggled to get to it.
Richard, I just saw your question. So I don't think there's any app for this, but this is a website you can use on your phone. Like if I went into Safari on my iPhone, like it works like perfectly fine. And then for Sudoku, if you type in sudoku.com in your app store, it'll pop right up and it's all free. None of this is paid or anything. Does that answer your question? I hope so, because I can't see you. Okay, I'm gonna say yes. Anyone else have anything else for us?
I was
Hey,
not
I got,
thumbs up. So yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I got a question, Karshna. When I click on that link, it
Yes.
asks me to register.
Oh,
Do I
that's
need to
weird.
register?
You didn't have to, because I don't have an account.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
didn't
telling me to sign in. It says email address and password.
That is so.
Can you exit out of it? Like, is it
Yeah.
kind of like trying to trick you into creating an account, but you don't really need one?
Well, I've clicked on it like 5 times. Let me see. I'll do it again.
You're not using the Slack link, are you? Because that requires a login.
Slack requires a username and you'll have to create an account. It's free though.
Oh, okay, so I have to create an account then.
Yes,
Yes,
it's like
Slack.
it's like Discord or like a messaging website. So you need an account for it so we know who you are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
That's what you
I'll
meant for this
create it.
website. I was like, that's so weird. I've never seen.
Okay.
Okay, that's a lot more clear. Anyone have anything else for us? Okay, well, feel free to hit us up at any time. Otherwise, have a good weekend. I hope you enjoy the game tomorrow and stay safe.
Hi guys, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night. Have a good day.